Good morning, dear colleagues. We begin our working week and day. And we start with the first topic, role of cultural policy in settling military conflicts. Intercultural dialogue as the way to peace in Ukraine. We'll speak to Robin Wilson, who is expert on conflicts and intercultural dialogue and peace. He's the main editor in openSecurity and openDemocracy section. Oleksandr Butsenko will be with him. He's director of Ukrainian Center for Cultural Studies, director of the Democracy through Culture Development Center, Council of the Council of Europe on cultural policy.
And start with the first topic on the role of cultural policy in settling military conflicts and intercultural dialogue as the key to peace in Ukraine. We will elaborate on this subject with Robin Wilson, the lead editor of the openSecurity section of openDemocracy. Mr. Wilson is an expert on ethnic conflict and on intercultural dialogue, and also with Oleksandr Butsenko, the director of the Ukrainian Center for Cultural Studies. Dear Mr. Wilson, шановний пане Буценко, прошу вас до слова.
Добрий день. Good morning. I will begin. I will start in Ukrainian, and I'm a director of Ukrainian Center for Cultural Studies by the Ministry of Culture. And we'll speak about the role of intercultural dialogue and the role of culture in settling ethnic and military conflicts. 2008, Ukrainian city in the south, that is Mariupol, became the first Ukrainian city that's a joint European network of intercultural cities. That program, Intercultural Cities, started in 2008 and united 12 European cities, starting with Great Britain and up to Russia. There was Yezhevsk that joined this pilot project. At the moment, the network includes more than 60 cities in Europe, and there's a national network of intercultural cities in Italy, Spain, Norway. What is intercultural city? That is a city that is builds relations in a new way between the government and civil society, which is trying to solve problems of its developments in a new way, trying to find a dialogue between different groups. In 2007, the Council of Europe approved a document, a white book on intercultural dialogue, and in 2011 it was presented in Ukrainian. And it's available in Ukraine. This document outlines main principles of European policy that should be based on the main European values: democracy, human rights, the rule of law, and identifies the directions in which intercultural dialogue must develop. All the countries, the members of the Council of Europe, signed this document, and gradually it is implemented into life. Yesterday we came with Mr. Wilson from Melitopol, and we met representatives of different nationalities that live in the city. The city has 157,000 people, residents, and more than about 100 nationalities in that city. If you speak on the street, you don't know which nationality they represented, because 3 people, it means 2 nationalities. Different nationalities are present in the city council, in NGOs, and in cultural organizations. They have small groups like Korean, and 2 big groups, Ukrainians, Russians, Czech, Polish, and Poles, Germans, and many other groups. They have 20 associations or societies, national societies, and we had a round table and discussed the issues of Ukraine. Just because of such multinationality structure, Melitopol, right after these events in Ukraine, when separatist movements started, because it is always focused at Russian business, and there are a lot of enterprise businessmen, all nationalities united on the Ukrainian flag, and they told, we are Ukrainians. There is the space where they speak between themselves. That is the ground. They have an intercultural museum, private museum, in Mariupol, set up, created by Karim Society. That museum tells about all all multinational community, and they have a round table. They come together and discuss the issues of the cities in Ukrainian symbols, decorated, and all of them get together in their national group. And they always say they are Ukrainians. 200 kilometers from Melitopol, there is Mariupol. We were on that road, and we thought how one can live in the world in peace now, and there are so many nationalities. And now I will give the floor to Robin Wilson, and who came from Northern Ireland, from Belfast. He knows a lot about conflicts, and when he came, they asked him whether he was afraid to go to Ukraine. He told that he's from the Northern Ireland, he's not afraid of that. And it was very interesting for him to look at one of the southern cities in Ukraine, because I know that is a border zone, border area. There are Ukrainian custom officers and border guards, and one of the most eastern cities, which was always focused at Russia. But now they declare that they are just purely Ukrainian people, though there are different ethnic groups and nationalities who live in there.
And it's a pleasure in Kiev. Obviously, I watched developments a few hundred meters from here over recent months on the TV screen, and I've been closely observing what's been going on in Ukraine, and indeed I commissioned Oleksandr to write a couple of articles for the publisher for whom I work on what was happening in Maidan at the time of the protests. So I'm glad to be here, and as Oleksandr said, we're both involved with the Council of Europe Intercultural Cities project, which arose from this document which I helped to write back in 2008, the White Paper on Intercultural Dialogue. I think there's a connection between those two things, in the sense that what's been happening in Ukraine over several years now in terms of tensions between East and West, and what's been happening more recently with the violence in Eastern Ukraine, is not entirely specific to Ukraine. There are tensions, albeit not normally violent, elsewhere in Europe between people of different ethnic and national backgrounds. And what we were trying to do with the white paper, and are trying to do in practice with the Intercultural Cities programme, is to look at ways that these tensions can be dealt with so that peace can be maintained and violence of the kind we've seen in eastern Ukraine prevented. And I was impressed by the visit we had to Melitopol, particularly because the people who spoke to us in Melitopol from the various different national communities kept saying to us, we just think peace is normal and natural here. And clearly, as long as they keep thinking that peace is normal and natural, it'll be very difficult for anyone to divide them along national lines. And that's an interesting lesson to learn from the experience. More generally, I've felt for many years that, and this isn't an official Council of Europe view, this is just my personal view as a political scientist, more generally, I've felt for many years that maybe some of the hard political divisions in Ukraine can be approached in a new way from a soft, quote-unquote, soft cultural perspective. By looking at some of these cultural issues, you may be able to find ways out of the hard obstacles between Russian speakers and Ukrainian speakers that have developed over the years between East and West. And I had a very interesting discussion, as did Oleksandr, just earlier this morning with a Deputy Minister on some of these issues. And we talked, for example, about the issue of language policy in Ukraine and the potential for development in language policy that would allow everyone, whether they were Russian speaker or Ukrainian speaker, or indeed from any other background in terms of mother tongue, to feel equal citizens of a united and integrated Ukraine. we also talked about issues to do with decentralization. And again, wearing my political scientist's hat is clearly important, that decentralization reforms are such as to ensure that people who live in eastern Ukraine can fully feel part of Ukraine and not be manipulated into thinking that it's much better if they should be pulled out and if they should secede from Ukraine into new Russia. I think that's all I want to say, but we'll take any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wilson. Чи є в нас, колеги, запитання?
Is there any question? Oleksandr Butsenko, the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. I would like very briefly to ask you a question. Can you tell us, what's your message? Very briefly, that's what did you bring? What did you want to tell us? That's the first question. The second question, what are we talking about now? Sasha, this is the question for you, because that small number of people who care about cultural policy in Ukraine, they were very happy. When you appointed, we thought that we would have the cultural strategy and it would be implemented. How did it happen that we have the Minister of Culture, new person, Vice Prime Minister on humanitarian issue? Cultural policy has not become the priority in our country. How did it happen that after Maidan, after the Revolution of Dignity, when the ideological issue was on the first page, when all the world says that now there is a fight and conflict on civilizations, how did it happen? Could it happen that in Ukraine, after Maidan, cultural policy is not identified as one of the priorities? I believe this is an issue for resignation of the Minister of Culture, Minister of Humanitarian Policy, and all the team that is around all these people.
I'm reluctant to give you a message in the sense I don't want to come in as an outsider and tell you here's the solution to the problems in Ukraine. I suppose what I would say, though, as an outsider, is that I feel that, and again, this is a personal view rather than a Council of Europe view, I do feel personally that Europe and the wider international community have not given the support to Ukraine that they could and should have done. They've been distracted by the Eurozone crisis and have had internal divisions over dependence on gas supplies from Russia and so on and so on. And I think a stronger voice from Europe would have been effective in perhaps making it plain to Moscow that some things are not possible. In the absence of that, I think we've seen the situation we've seen in eastern Ukraine, and we've seen the nature of the aggression that has taken place there. And I would still hope that we would see, personally, as I say, a stronger stance by Europe and the wider international community in support of Ukraine.
Thank you. My message would be culture must take Ukraine, lead Ukraine out of the conflict we have, and not sufficient attention to culture brought to these issues we have, to these problems we have in Ukraine. Why cultural policies develop so slowly? When we started in 2003, when we started to work with cities, we thought that in a year and two we could deliver changes, and then we found out that on the level of cities, changes had taken place during 10 years, and when we worked, it seemed to us, when we wanted to start a new cultural policy, cultural industries, that's a huge process. Now the ministry is clear at least about priorities, what should be done urgently. Maybe they're not perfect, and they started to work on the mid-term and long-term of cultural development or strategy of cultural development, and they involve science institutions, our center, Institute of Culturology, National Institute of Strategic Research, and we involve Association of Cities, representatives of local councils, and also a lot of NGOs are involved. But, that information policy in Ukraine was very fragmented. There were a lot of opinions that contradicted each other, and they faced some opposition. So the most important is to find something that unites us. That's what we were trying to do in Melitopol. And we agreed that we could develop some kind of a chart that unites representatives of different groups. And we thought, what can unite Ukraine now? And when they started to think about that, they came to a conclusion that Ukraine is not that separated. And we're united not only by history, but because we wanted to live in peace, we wanted to live in solidarity, and many other things. So they identified about 30 points, issues that can unite Ukraine, and they are related to people. The same happened in Great Britain when they developed creative industries, and they chose 50 main principles. Then they reduced it to 30, and then they stopped on 7 principles on which they built cultural policy of cultural development. So we need to agree, all of us, what unites us. We should identify those. If we speak about human rights, cultural rights, democracy, we should understand what's behind that, and on what we can build on. So what I mean, this is a process. I want cultural policy to become one of the main issues, because we could make the same mistakes like we did. We reported about cultural success in the East, in Crimea. Maybe we developed our own cultural policy. Maybe that was not success. Maybe it did not cover something which is in deep, something we would like to develop. We would like to develop cultural citizenship for all of us to understand that we belong to a new culture, to the culture of Ukraine. That's why in Western media they say new Ukraine. What does it mean? We don't understand that yet. What does it mean if we say old Ukraine? How different we are? What can we offer to Europe? It could be late, and still they listen to us. If we don't show that we are really new, they will forget about us, because there are lots of conflicts in the world, and there are a lot of economic problems in Europe and outside of Europe, and we should know that we are unique, we are new, and then it will be better to live. And the role of culture, as I agree with you, should become a key element, and we discussed that with Mr. Groisman, and that's around that we should unite different ministries, and I hope that we'll start working on that after elections. We still have some questions.
Thank you for coming to us with such a topic that's very topical topic. Unfortunately, few people talk about that. I am from also Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. I would like to ask a few questions. No one has doubts that cultural policy is of importance, but for the cultural policy to be implemented, it has to be implemented at the state level, at the level of civil society. But for that, we need people who know how this is happening abroad. When will there be lustration in this sphere? We know that in the Ministry of Culture, no changes are taking place. That's the first question. And the second is a comment. I believe to hold round tables at the topic of how different we are and what unites us is one thing, but nothing disunites us. We are Ukraine. We don't have any regional problems. It's not a problem that some people speak Ukrainian, other Russian, and that's important for foreigners. And I believe that the role of people's diplomacy should be more important. How can we develop this cultural diplomacy, people's diplomacy, cultural diplomacy? Talking about lustration, I came to work to the Ukrainian Center for Cultural Research just to work on these topics. You know that the leadership of the ministry is now different, and we still have the assembly of the activists of culture who criticize and who demand lustration. But the assembly also created the Congress of activists. They are active. Where are they active? They do work. Go to virtual space and they organize schools in Berdichev. Unfortunately, we see the activists of Maidan everywhere. Where are these cultural activists? Oksana, you talk about cultural diplomacy, but I cannot answer for both the Congress and the association. There is such city, Pavlograd in Dnipropetrovsk region. This is, so to say, the capital of Western Donbass. And there is a capital of Volyn, Lutsk. And these cities decided to break stereotypes which exist in Ukraine and which exist in Europe. And they were joined by Buchirka town, which is close to Stockholm, and they are now together working on a project. When we asked people in Pavlograd what they know about Lutsk, and when we asked people in Lutsk what they know about Pavlograd, we were surprised at what people know about Ukraine and other things. Main thing is communication. The deputy mayor of Lviv mentioned that the main problem in Ukraine is communication between Ukrainians. The fact that we do not know Ukraine is one of the main reasons. And that is a big problem in information activities, and the cultural diplomacy, people's diplomacy is important. These are representatives, young people who want to do something, young people from Pavlograd who were surprised that they are considered to be not cultural city of coal miners, and that's the city where the coal miners are just 9%. And the same thing when we asked them about Lutsk, people did not know much about that. And they, together with young people from Sweden, will not be just defining stereotypes, but they will be trying to present them so that we understand what is right and what is wrong. I cannot tell you anything about the plans of the ministry. I am trying to develop the strategy with them and the priorities. But I understand that this process is very lengthy. When we started back in 2005, the law of Ukraine was approved on the concept of the state policy in the sphere of culture. If you look in the archive of Verkhovna Rada, you will see that the law talks about how the culture should be financed and so on. This law was for 2 years. We believe that in 2 years we will be able to do everything. In 2007 it expired, and then we did not manage to do everything, and now we understand that this process is very long. When European experts arrived, we said we want to draft some documents, and they said these are not the documents which are important, but the process is important. And then everyone, when we develop the process, then we will be able to be proud of the strategy. We should understand that culture is not just arts. It includes everything, how we live, how we communicate, how we build the country. And that is the culture. And that is the definition which was approved by UNESCO, and especially talking about cultural heritage. It's all interrelated, but how to do it so that it corresponds, that it finds reaction with everyone. Можливо, ви ще
У нас є ще запитання.
have more questions?
The college, I'll speak in English. I'm also the vice president for the American Association of Ukrainian Studies. I've been studying the history of culture of Ukraine for about 15 years, and I understand the importance of things like historical memory, language policy, and so on. But in being here about 4 or 5 times in Ukraine since the Maidan started, I think some of the broader issues in culture, such as do we value respect for the law, equality of opportunity, and what about these economic questions that in Eastern Ukraine probably alarmed people even more than language policy or policies toward history. Business relations with Russia, for example, and what would happen to them made people very frightened. So I guess my question is, what about these other questions that go beyond the standard questions in cultural policy, like language, historical memory, and so on? How are you dealing with those things? Because I see them as being probably even more important, and I'm a historian of culture.
And I'm not going to claim I've got an answer to everything, and I'm happy to defer to your superior expertise in that regard. I suppose just to say, first of all, I agree with you on the point about the lack of embeddedness of norms like the rule of law and equal opportunities is that's a hugely important issue. If we're going to get beyond the kind of conflictual partisanship that has been evident in recent years, and at worst the violence of more recent times, then there needs to be a capacity to engage in democratic debate and argument which doesn't fall foul of the rule of law and sticks within civilized constraints. On the economy, yes, absolutely, it's clear that the traditional industrial base of Ukraine was in the east, and that needs to be revitalized and revivified into a more modern knowledge economy. That's a whole day's discussion, and I'm not going to start on it now, except to say, yes, obviously that does pose a major challenge that needs to be addressed.
Я тут думав розповісти про економіку вражень.
I was thinking about what to tell you about economics.
I will share what happened in Manipula. There was a very poor situation in the economy. It was oriented not to produce engines, but to produce something for Russia. But they asked us to help with the economy. We told them we will not be able to do it. We would suggest something new. There was a pause in our relations. Then we came the second time, the third time, and they started to think different. They did now as a brand, not like economic hub or railroad hub, but this is an intercultural city. They came to their origins. Why they have that name? This is the city of honey. They started to develop green tourism and honey tourism, and now they have intercultural business incubator and of young businessmen of different nationalities, and they would like to create innovative projects. We thought a lot about that, but that should be a local initiative that came up. One of the initiators, he's Ukrainian-Italian Oleksandr Butsenko. His father is an Italian, his mother is Ukrainian from Melitopol, and it's an absolutely normal thing in Melitopol. They have mixed families, and they developed incubator. They give little money to young businessmen to realize their ideas. So this is an answer to will not be able to renovate old things. We will not go back to the past. We'll need to find new forms. And they are related to innovation and creativity. All of that is related to culture. And someone who is working on culture, they receive some energy to innovative thinking, creative thinking, and then absolutely new economy of impressions of cultural industry begins. And our Center of Cultural Studies, we have a topic. We have a study how cultural industries, how they work now, and we need to develop the state concept of to support cultural industries using the experience of the UK, of the Netherlands, and other European countries, because that is the direction which works in those developing countries, and we must develop. We must develop now, and it will be a very important thing for Ukraine. More questions?
Mr. Wilson, the language issue is used as a weapon, as a heavy weapon when it comes to the ethnic conflicts. From your experience, from your practice, what's your opinion? If in Ukraine back in November 2013, more opportunities in terms of language would be given to the Eastern Ukraine, would it help us to prevent the situation that Ukraine lives today, the war? Because some say that this is from the language issue, that the war started in Ukraine, and then this helped Putin to do what he does in Ukraine.
Well, I think there's some truth in that. Clearly, as has been said, it's not purely an issue of language, but it's one of the issues that's on the table. And the attempt after the Maidan Revolution to change the language legislation in such a way as to downplay the status of Russian, I think was a political mistake. In the end, it wasn't translated into reality, but the signal it sent out was not a good signal to send out at the time, and it could then, yes, be part of a discourse from Putin and his supporters that presented everything in Kiev as the work of fascists and right sector and Ukraine nationalists and so on and so on and so on. So yes, is my answer to what you're saying, I think.
Коли якщо немає запитань, то я дякую нашим.
If there is no question, I would like to thank our speakers. Thank you very much.